The Public vs. Autistic Tony Stark by ajexists. Chapter 3. Slurs. Tony stops playing with stim toys for the next few days after that interaction. He felt so ashamed. He's supposed to be this big, confident man. It doesn't matter what people think. He's Tony Stark. He can do whatever he wants. But then a father, his mind provides, tells him he can't use a simple stim toy. He crumbles, falls apart. His mind goes on rapid tangents of, "You don't need this, you don't deserve to use these, they're just stupid kids' toys, why do you need them?" It wasn't until Peter's lab day that he started using them again. The kid noticed how Tony would be constantly eyeing his toys, even on occasion reaching out to grab one. But whenever Peter asked if he wanted to use them, he would always say no. Eventually, Peter was able to get Tony to explain what happened, and the kid gave him the boost of confidence he needed to start using the stim toys again. After Peter left, Tony started doing research on one thing the guy said that bothered him: taking away resources. Turns out there really aren't any resources to take away, especially for autistic adults. There are schools and programs for autistic children, and sure, there are some programs for autistic adults too. But most of the programs he sees are for those with consistent high support needs. Plus, he assumed the guy, based off of how the conversation started, was talking about stuff like stim toys or noise-cancelling headphones, which are not only for autistic children, or just autistic people in general, and are sold in a lot of public schools, including online. So basically, the man had no clue what he was talking about, and just shaming Tony for no reason. Cool. The next week rolls around and Pepper reminds Tony, aka telling him for the first time since he never remembers, about a presentation he's giving at a high school. A bunch of the top NYC private schools robotics clubs are getting together for a robotics competition. The winning team receives $20,000 in scholarship money per person towards a degree in engineering, which is being funded by none other than Stark Industries. "Just talk about your time at MIT and building dummy," Pepper had said. So with only a day until the competition, he started writing a speech, which, to be fair, is considerably earlier than most times. The next day he drives to the high school where the event will take place and immediately heads to the principal's office. The principal, who he learns is named Mr. Bryant, tells him about the event and when he will give his speech. "All these kids are so clever. Every year I swear they just get smarter and smarter, and this money will help change these kids' lives. Thank you, Mr. Stark, for doing this. It's an honour to have you here." "It's my pleasure," he smiled. They had Tony arrive an hour before the kids came, mainly so he could tour the gym and do a quick run-through of his PowerPoint, which totally wasn't worked on during the car ride up. After they got the PowerPoint working, Tony went off and hid in the storage room that held all the gym equipment. Before every speech he's given, he always tries to find a space to hide out in. He thought before it was because he didn't want people to constantly harass him before he had to speak, which is still true, but it goes so much deeper than that. After his diagnosis, he realised it was to preserve his energy. He couldn't mingle and talk with multiple people, and then have the spotlight on him while he essentially talks to everyone again. So he hides out. It also allows him to get out whatever nervous energy he has, and often without everyone looking at him. He often paces, rubs his fingers together, flaps his hands, all while reciting the speech in his head or quietly whispering it. Today he ended up bringing one of his bike chain fidgets, which he used while pacing. About 5 minutes before he was meant to give his speech, the principal came in and asked if he was ready to head out. Tony checked his watch. He can handle 5 minutes of being surrounded by multiple loud teenagers, so he nodded. He walks out and the already loud teenagers he heard within the storage room get about 10 times louder. He squeezes his eyes shut for a second because closing your eyes totally helps with the noise, right? He opened his eyes back up and they walk over to the computer to reset his PowerPoint. Why they couldn't have kept it up all the time? Who knows? It's at this point the teens notice that the Tony Stark is there, and a wave of excited shouts directed at him fill the room. Tony gives the teens a small smile and wave before focusing back on the computer. "Tony Stark is a retard!" Tony jerks his head over at the crowd. All of the teens look at the boy, who presumably said the word. Some of them are laughing with the boy, others are shouting at him, while others are quietly glancing between the boy and him. 3 of the staff members immediately yell at the boy, taking him out to the hallway. One of them happened to be Mr. Bryant, who before going out in the hallway with the others, he comes back over to Tony and says, "I am so sorry, Mr. Stark. We are going to handle this issue now with him. We'll start this event and have you speak a little later. Please, just try to relax, and again I deeply apologise for his behaviour." The principal runs off and Tony sits down in a seat nearby. If you looked up the definition of privilege in the dictionary, you would find a picture of Tony Stark. Okay, you wouldn't, but Tony is well aware of his privilege. He's white, cis, mostly straight male. He grew up rich, he's always had power, he's able-bodied, and even though he has struggled, he's been able to function mostly on his own. He's never really had to deal with discrimination, with slurs. Sure, his father and a couple of people at college called him the F-slur, but he's only ever dated women, so he never felt like it was directly targeting him, who he is. This was the first time someone had ever called him that. Again, because of his intelligence, his privilege, he's never been called that word, at least not to his face. Tony rapidly bounced his leg. Of course he's heard the word before. He grew up in the 70s and 80s. That word was used to call someone dumb. And while many words were thrown at Tony throughout his schooling years, he was never called dumb or the R-slur. He also knew the word was used to describe mentally challenged people. So that's what he was now, mentally challenged. He felt weird, kind of horrible. Some scumbag of a kid thought he should insult Tony's entire character, all because of a diagnosis he received. Just because the kid thought it was funny. He felt terrible. Imagine having to deal with that every day for your whole life. He felt bad for the people with less privilege than him. Eventually the principal comes back in, tapping Tony on the shoulder. He jerks out of his thoughts and looks up at him. "We talked to the student. We do not respect bullying or discrimination of any kind, so we decided the best course of action would to be not allow him to participate in the event. If his team wins the competition, he will still receive the money as we thought that would be unfair, but he will not be participating in the actual building of the robot," Mr. Bryant said. "Again, I deeply apologise for this student's behaviour." All Tony could do was nod in that moment. Mr. Bryant stared at him for a few seconds before nodding himself. "Well then, we need to get this thing started, huh? Still feeling up for inspiring these kids?" Tony flashed a smile, his signature, and very fake, smile. "Definitely." "Awesome. I'll give the opening speech, introduce you on, you talk for a bit, and then I'll come back to start the competition." Tony once again nodded. The whole event went by in a blur. He barely heard Mr. Bryant talking, only hearing his name and being called up. He went on to talk about building dummy and briefly on his time being an engineering student. Tony's become quite good at the talking while having no clue what you're saying ordeal. He finishes his speech and sits back down the whole time the students are in the building, half aware of where he is. At the end, he looks at each student's builds, doesn't contribute much to the judging, then a winner is announced. He doesn't know which team won, other than it wasn't the team who had the boy. He took a photo with the winners and then immediately left. He sat in his car for 10 minutes, borderline dissociated from everything that happened. Then he drives himself home. I hope you enjoyed that chapter. Have a lovely day.